Every single game in the Pokemon series has its own unique mechanics, different Pokemon that rise to the top, and little quirks that set it apart. And I think the best part of competitive singles is that this community preserves these older metagames that you can go back and play. There's a community for every generation, and it's fun to return to these old installments and try something fresh and unique. I am going to rank every single generation of Pokemon from a competitive point of view, with a focus on the OU format for competitive singles in each game. And before I get into it, I think it's important to say that all of these generations have their own unique appeal and communities that love them. What I value in a Pokemon format will be different from you, and I've got my own ideas about what makes a metagame fun and appealing. So let's get into my ranking of every single competitive Pokemon game. But first, here's a game where the Marvel Universe comes to life on your very own mobile device. This video is sponsored by Marvel Strike Force, a dynamic squad-based RPG with many iconic Marvel heroes and villains like Iron Man, Wolverine, or Venom to choose from. Use my link in the description or scan the QR code to download the game for free and unlock free characters. Get ready for some epic combat against powerful threats like Doctor Doom and Apocalypse. You'll recruit the classics like Iron Man, Wolverine, and Venom, level them up and complete missions that unlock gear, which you'll use in the vast selection of PvE and PvP modes. This is the kind of game that offers endless team combinations and potential for strategic gameplay. I love figuring out different synergies and perfecting my team composition, so this is right up my alley. New characters are constantly being released along with new costumes. Recently, they released Blade and his team of Night Stalkers, and they are even doing some free character giveaways for November, so it's a perfect time to jump in. This month, there is a brand new game mode called Battle World. Battle World is an exciting new PvE mode where you can participate alongside your alliance. If you're a new or returning player, be on the lookout for awesome rewards to celebrate Battle World's launch. But there is even more. To celebrate the spooky season, players can redeem the promo code Halloween to get 100 free shards for Zombie Iron Man, 600k gold, and 480 L2 training module. You can download Marvel Strike Force today by clicking the link down below or scanning the QR code on screen. Thank you to Marvel Strike Force for sponsoring the video. At the bottom of my list, I have Generation 8 OU. To me, this is the least appealing OU format in the series, and I will probably never return to this or give it much of a try. I have no desire to do so. That being said, folks, I've been harsh on this generation in the past, but I've warmed up to it a little bit. There are defenders of Gen 8, and people do return to this generation for a reason. It's a pretty fun generation in terms of team building. You can come up with some pretty creative teams. It is a balanced environment where there's a lot of support to build around interesting things, and some players enjoy that. For example, Pikachu has praised Gen 8 OU for being a world where he can bring interesting ideas to life in his teams. And some players think team building is the most fun part of the game, more so even than the moment-to-moment gameplay of battles. Coming up with a cool team is more satisfying than that. I don't necessarily think that way, though. Team building and a balanced metagame are important factors, but I think that the most important thing are the top-tier Pokemon that define the metagame cool, varied, are there a lot of playstyles possible, and basically are battles fun. And sometimes even in very centralized metagames like Ubers, the format can just be fun, even if many teams look the same. And it's a subjective thing, but I just don't find Gen 8 fun. There's a lot of options that got deleted in Gen 8, and you really feel that. There's no hidden power. There's no pursuit. A lot of random stuff got cut. But something that did get changed was teleport can now pivot. It's a negative priority pivoting move that a bunch of things got. A bunch of slow, bulky Pokemon got the ability to slow pivot very safely, and that creates some annoying gameplay in my opinion. You compound that with boots, which are a new item that ignore hazards, and you can chuck that on those same defensive walls and they will just ignore hazards, safely come in, pivot into a threat, and then make progress. I feel like this sterilizes the gameplay, and if you look at a lot of Gen 8 replays, it's kind of just people trying to make safe clicks over and over. Nobody's taking any risks. You're knocking off boots. It's just not a fun dynamic in my opinion. I also think it kind of lacks source, that all the unique Pokemon that exist only in Gen 8 aren't that interesting or exciting. There's like Melmetal. I think that Pokemon's hideous. I hate Double Iron Bash. I don't like Melmetal at all. Buzzwole's really good in Gen 8 specifically. Absolute freak of a Pokemon, looks terrible. There's like Zeraora is probably my favorite, but not an incredible Pokemon that's gonna make me play the game or anything, just a fast electric type pivot. There's no generational mechanic. There's a lot of stuff cut. It just feels plain. It feels unexciting, and I don't think it has much of a fun identity that draws me in. There's nothing like that compelling to me about Gen 8 OU, so I put it at the bottom personally. If you like Gen 8, you're free to do so. Enjoy yourself. It's not for me at all, folks. It's not for me. Up next is one I've thought about, and one that pains me a little bit because I used to think highly of this generation, but it's got to be Gen 7 OU. And my opinion on this has changed drastically. When this gen was current, I was pretty fond of it. I was pretty active in OU, got some high ladder positions and stuff, and was enjoying the metagame back then. But I don't know, I think that might have been just Stockholm Syndrome or something. Like, I'm just so used to the current gen that I haven't stopped to evaluate it from a detached perspective. And if I do that, if you think in retrospect and you compare it to all the gens, I have to be honest and say Gen 7 is a pure chaos metagame where they took things a bit too far, in my opinion. Gen 7 is a format that's very polarized, and some people like that about it. Like, it's got almost every mechanic. You got Megas and Z moves. You have some insanely overtuned offensive and defensive Pokemon. Like, the Ultra Beasts are crazy. The Tapus are pre-nerfed. They're doing way more with the terrain, as is everything else on your team. You got Pokemon like Magearna and Ash Greninja, which are just nuts. Ash Greninja especially is just unbelievable. What if we gave Greninja a bunch of stats and a priority move that multi-hits and is special and gets rain boosted? Man, I hate those Gen 7 rain teams because they just build themselves and it's just an incredibly straightforward, uninteresting game plan. I don't know, folks. But I feel like Gen 7 you got those psychic terrain hyper offense teams. It's just, what if I go all in with threats and deal a bunch of damage? I don't like Z moves as a mechanic, really. It doesn't feel great to play with, in my opinion. There is some interesting team building that open up with Z moves, like funny options like Solar Beam Z or Giga Impact Z, but I don't know. That's not that interesting when you actually boil it down. It's just a big attack, and usually you just chuck the Z move on an Ultra Beast to get the boost, or Magearna to get the boost or something. That's about it. There's not that many interesting novel Z moves that come up. It's usually just, I'm gonna put this on my sweeper and deal a lot of damage, and that's just playing around it. You can make them waste the Z move. I don't like those kind of very polarized 50-50s. Like, I can coin flip and die, or they lose their big resource. I don't know. I prefer things when they're more balanced, lower power level. Things aren't as polarizing. It's a bit crazy when, not only are the offensive threats so powerful, but the defensive Pokemon are too. Like Toxapex it's got a great typing, great defenses, regen, scald, recover, baneful bug. Like, it's just, okay, let's give this guy everything in the world. Same with like Mega Sableye. Stall teams are at their most annoying in Gen 7, in my opinion. They're not necessarily the best, but they're just hell to face. No fun whatsoever. I think that this gen is just pure chaos. It's pure chaos. It's one of the highest power levels ever. Maybe the highest ever. That's arguable, I guess, but I think there's too much going on here, and there's no like middle of the road balanced strategy that feels good. Everything is broken. Some people like that about it. It's kind of fun in a way because everything's so broken, but I think, if I'm being honest, I can't call it a great metagame that I have much desire to return to and sink my teeth into. So Gen 7 near the bottom in my eyes. Up next, I've got Generation 9, the current generation. I think it has been long enough to evaluate this generation, and I'd put it about here. Gen 9, I honestly like it more than Gen 8 and 7. I think Terra is a more fun mechanic that makes the generation firmly stand out. I mean, in the future, this will probably be the only gen where Terra is allowed, and that just in and of itself gives it some real identity. And I think that a lot of people disagree with the decision to preserve Terra. It does come with a lot of problems. It breaks a lot of Pokemon. It enhances a lot of annoying strategies, but you have to admit that it can be pretty epic sometimes. The defensive Terras, one-time reversal Terras, or unique Terra Blast types. It is a little bit more skillful and interesting than Z moves, in my opinion. I like that it's universal, anyone can do it, which means that there's dynamic ways to use it. There's more of a decision to be made, whereas a Z move is just, I have it on this Pokemon and he's doing a big nuke. You can use it for a big nuke, or you can use it for a one-time defensive play, or become Ghost to spin block and get your hazards up. You lose your Terra, but maybe those hazards are worth it. There's way more going on with Terra. Also, you compare it to like Gen 8. The new Pokemon in Gen 9 are way more a part of the metagame. They firmly make the game feel unique. Like, Great Tusk is everywhere, Goldengo is everywhere, King Gambit, whether you like him or not, is at least making this game feel different. I kind of enjoy some of the new Pokemon. I like Iron Valiant. I like Roaring Moon. I think they're alright. I also like the fact that they nerfed recovery moves. That was a good choice. They got rid of the teleport stuff. So even though there's less options than in Gen 7 and previous gens in terms of like hidden powers not there, pursuits not there, whatever, the moveset cuts feel better in this gen than they did in Gen 8. Like, they cut stuff that was actually kind of annoying, and they nerfed the recovery moves. Less things get Scald. Teleport is on none of those Pokemon anymore, so that's not leading to those powerful pivots existing everywhere. That being said, the generation is plagued with a lot of issues. It has taken ages to reach any semblance of a balanced state, and to get there has been an arduous process that has been the most divisive thing I've ever seen in the Pokemon community. Everything is just, everyone disagrees. No one can agree on absolutely anything. Some people still want Terra banned. Sleep ban was a problem. Zamazenta shouldn't be here. What's he doing here? Darkrai is here. Some people disagree with that. They want King Gambit banned. Kyurem ban was rigged. Why was it rigged? It's just been the most dramatic tiering process I've ever been a part of ever. It's been insane. I don't know though. I kind of like that like Zamazenta's allowed and Darkrai, like that's kind of unique. I would rather play Gen 9 than Gen 7 or 8. I think it will stand the test of time better than Gen 8. Probably not more than Gen 7. I think Gen 7 will be more beloved because you can use Megas and Z moves. But Gen 9 feels a bit more unique to me, has more going on, has more of an identity that I prefer. And the gameplay I think is more fun than Gen 7 because of the unique dynamics Terra creates. Although sometimes Terra's annoying. It's at least unique. Up next is Gen 5. I used to rank this gen very close to the top. It's a beloved gen for me. It's got sentimental value. I started playing competitive singles when Gen 5 was current. That's the format that shaped my opinion of competitive singles as a whole, and I've got a lot of nostalgia towards it, a lot of fondness for it. But if we're being honest, it's one of the most controversial metagames in history. Infamous for permanent rain and just all the incredibly powerful new stuff that was introduced that has been difficult to balance for as long as we can all remember, hasn't it? There's been bans as recently as this year, with Cloyster getting banned. The gem bans were quite recent. There's still stuff happening in Gen 5. They still haven't figured it out. How long has it been? They want to ban Alakazam or something. They were trying to ban Reuniclus. They didn't, though. It's never ending. It never ends with Gen 5, truly. However, you can't deny the uniqueness of this generation. Stuff is viable here that has never been viable since. Like Politoed with its permanent rain is absolutely dominant, but never again. And permanent rain enables so much interesting stuff, like Tentacruel is outstanding in Gen 5 and not really fantastic anywhere else. And these permanent weather effects can enable some pretty fun teammates. Like, I don't know, Feraligatr is actually okay in Gen 5 because of permanent rain. The gameplay often centers around like also really polarizing and powerful strategies, like Psy Spikes is popular, a sand team that uses Reuniclus, Alakazam, and Latios to overwhelm Tyranitar and then break through with, you know, the powerful Alakazam, Reuniclus, just the psychic type threats that otherwise get beat by Tyranitar. You just throw them at Tyranitar until it falls. Rain teams rely on like Thunderous Theory and Keldeo and Tornadus and threats like this that are just kind of insane if they are in the right circumstance. Like Thunderous Therian with Rain Up, hidden paralyzes with the perfectly accurate Thunder off a massive special attack. Even switch ends are just getting paralyzed, and it's so inconsistent to actually beat that if it's in the right spot. Matchups feel very polarized. There's like hyper offense teams that are just absolutely all in. They lead with a Rock Setter, go to Volcarona or something, Dragonite. The offensive threats are crazy here. It's very matchup dependent, and often like in a good matchup it's just a very straightforward win, and that never really feels fun. You want to have some agency in competitive Pokemon. You want to be able to, okay, this is a bad matchup, but I can outplay them. I have time to respond to what's going on. But in Gen 5 it often feels like in a bad matchup the guy just overwhelms you before you even have time to do anything, and on it that just doesn't feel very good, to be frank. But I still do play the metagame from time to time. I enjoy it for what it is, and I think it stands out quite a lot and is one of the most iconic generations for all the unique stuff happening in it. So give it some respect for that, but I can't rank it that high on this list if I'm being completely honest and fair. Up next, I would put Generation 1 OU. This is a metagame a lot of people hate. They think it's terrible. It's very bare bones. Not much is in here. I mean, it was the first game. There's not a lot going on. Every team looks pretty similar. There's some variations, but most teams have the same Pokemon on them because there's just not much else to choose from. Also, the mechanics are crazy in this generation. There's crit chances based on your speed. There's Hyper Beam is broken. The special stat is a crazy mechanic. You have Freeze, just kills you. If you get frozen, you cannot thaw out ever. Unless you get hit by a fire move, and no one even uses fire moves ever. Counter doesn't work on anything except normal and fighting moves, and also it can be stored, and the amount of crazy Gen 1 mechanics is too many to name. Of course, I won't even attempt to. But all that being said, I think that Gen 1's two fundamental qualities, that bare bones simplicity of not much being in the game in the first place, and those wacky mechanics, make it stand out a significant amount and make it honestly pretty interesting to return to and just try out every once in a while. I often get the itch to just play some Gen 1 because there's nothing else like it. It's truly one of a kind. It's probably the most unique generation in the series mechanically. I also think that Gen 1 high-level play is very impressive because when things are so limited in terms of your tools, one little difference on a team feels so much more amplified. And the way people play Gen 1, they have optimized like lines of play to an extent you don't see in other generations. Because, you know, I don't know, switching in Chansey on an Alakazam is such a common thing that happens on turn 1, for example. Taking the Thunder Wave so that your Chansey can't get frozen later. Like, you're thinking about stuff that's happening way later on turn 1 of the game. The decision making is very unique in Gen 1, where there's no anti-status mechanic, so you just have to accept getting paralyzed or slept or whatever. So choosing what to get put to sleep on is a big decision. Doesn't sound very fun probably to you. I just think it's interesting the kinds of decisions people have to make in Gen 1. I find it pretty interesting to watch too. And I don't know if you folks have ever played against a good Gen 1 player, but it does feel very different to playing against good players in any other gen. It feels like you're just getting destroyed and you can't even understand why. Almost like a chess match where they're just way beyond what you even understand about the format. And little mistakes feel so punishing. That being said, there's a lot of nonsense in Gen 1, a lot of variance where 1v1ing like a Chansey comes down to hoping they get full powered eventually, critting them, psychic drops, freezing them. Like, you gotta rely on these secondary effects happening, and over time they will happen eventually, but often games come down to like who gets it first, or who gets a good sequence that creates a domino effect. That's not very fun sometimes, but I do like the format. I think it's interesting. I think it's unique, and it's got an appeal to me. I do return to it and play it from time to time. So for that reason, I give it some respect. Up next, I would put Gen 6 OU. Formerly a format I had little respect for, just based on my limited experience, but I have grown more and more fond of over the years. Gen 6 OU, I think you gotta give it the title of best modern metagame. And I think that the modern games are Gen 6 onwards. Gen 6 is a balanced format, it's an interesting format, it's a skillful format. The gameplay is, in my opinion, pretty fun. You have the Mega mechanic, which I think is more fun to play with in Gen 6 than it is in Gen 7. And is probably the best of the generational gimmicks. I also like that Toxapex isn't here. I hate Toxapex. He's not in this. Gengar also still has Levitate. It's the last gen where Gengar has Levitate, so he's alright in OU. I like Gengar, so I'm a fan of that. Sometimes balanced teams in this generation feel a little bit samey, where they got like Clefable, Tornadus Theory, and Ferrothorn. And there's similar gameplay to what I talked about in Gen 8, with just trying to pivot safely, get entry points, get little progress here and there. And that can be a little bit boring, but I don't know, I don't think it's too bad. It seems like there's good enough offensive tools and defensive tools, and they're pretty well balanced on either side. I think there's an established top tier, but you can also get a little bit creative. And I like that interesting megas prop up that don't later. Like Mega Gardevoir is good, and it's a pretty fun Pokemon to use as a wall breaker. Mega Manectric is my favorite. I like Mega Manectric a lot. Very cool design. Mega Altaria is also quite good in Generation 6 OU, and I think Mega Altaria is also one of the better Mega designs. If you compare Gen 6 to Gens 7, 8, and 9, I think that Gen 6 is the most desirable. It's got some powerful stuff in it. Megas are a very powerful concept, but they're actually nerfed a little bit, because in Gen 6, when you Mega Evolve, you don't get the Mega Form speed stat yet, so that is a little bit of a nerf to Megas. It makes like Mega Metagross much less powerful. Megas come at a cost. They don't have the item slot. There's only one per team, and they're a bit telegraphed. There's no powerful nuke mechanic like Z-moves or Terra or Gems or whatever. I think there's normal Gem, but that's it. So offensive threats aren't just going to win in one turn. Defensive Pokemon aren't going to live for a million years and make you bang your head against the wall. Like, the Pokemon here are fun. The gameplay's fun. It's all around just a pretty solid, balanced, good metagame. Not much complaints. I would like to invest a bit of time in Gen 6 in the future and give it a go. Give it a real go. It's one that I've got my eye on to actually try out and maybe play in some tournaments, honestly. Up next is Gen 2 OU, a format that is considered very skillful. Many Smogon veterans call this their favorite competitive format, and there are dedicated players that have been active in this generation for many years. I think Gen 2 probably doesn't have that much broad appeal for a massive audience. I mean, you can't deny it is quite slow-paced. The metagame does have quite a bit more variety than Gen 1 does, but still, there's no EVs, there's less team-building customization, less items available, and less Pokemon. And on top of that, the Pokemon that are present are very centralizing. Snorlax is extremely centralizing. It's an auto-include on teams. It's very powerful. Zapdos is the same. The best Pokemon in the game, Snorlax, is a bulky machine that's very difficult to KO. It gets so much out of leftovers, which is percentage healing, and it's got a high HP. It's a demon. It's very, very difficult to break down and eliminate a Snorlax in Gen 2. There's also the rest talk mechanics that are infamous, because you can sleep talk, can call rest, and you can heal repeatedly with that. So The power level is low, perhaps too low. Progress is difficult and takes a while. You gotta like thief the Snorlax. You can only set 1 layer of spikes as well, so that progress is slow. There's no sandstorm to speed things up. There's no choice band or choice specs for wall breaking. There's no high power attacks even. It's just good old fashioned fundamental Pokemon. I quite enjoy the gameplay though. I usually don't play slow paced teams in Gen 2. I try to go as fast as I can with options like Nidoking, Jinx, Thief users, Gengar, and more aggressive Snorlax sets, usually with self-destruct on them. In Gen 2, if you play a mirror match where you're both playing a passive team, it can be quite grueling. So I like to run something that has a bit more offensive punch as much as I can. But I think that the way offense plays in Gen 2 is pretty fun and satisfying. The way that you wear down and lure in walls, and the reward when you finally do break through something is quite cool. I enjoy watching it and hearing about what's going on in Gen 2. And I really admire Gen 2 top players. I think that they're some of the most skilled Pokemon players ever. A lot of people probably will disagree with me on this. It's a hard generation to sell people on. It's slow. It is unintuitive in many ways, but I think it's cool. I don't mind slow gameplay, and I like the way offense plays here. I like the unique offensive threats you can use like Nidoking and Marowak and stuff. And I enjoy a low power level environment where progress feels like this. It's a little bit more methodical. But my next choice might sort of go against that in a way, because up next I've got Gen 4 OU. This is a metagame I've spoken ill of in my videos quite a bit, but people may get it twisted and think that I hate this format. I actually think it's one of the better ones in the game's history. Besides my favorite format, which we'll get to, I'm sure many of you know what that is. Gen 4 is the one I probably return to the most and feel like playing the most, on the ladder at least. It does have a lot of problems. I mean, Jirachi with Iron Head, very annoying. A little bit overblown in how annoying it is. You can beat it pretty easily, but Jirachi's also frustrating in its set variety and how to actually respond to it. There's like Dynamic Punch Machamp. There's a lot of variants that can take place. There's a lot of really explosive offensive threats like Dragonet's Gyarados, Lucario with extreme speed and bullet punch. And then there's Clefable is a little bit annoying too, with its Magic Guard shenanigans. I also think that having Stealth Rock in the game and having no team preview and a higher power level is a little bit of a weird combination, because there are so many options in this format that it's a bit hard to predict what your opponent has in the back, and that can just catch you off guard if they have the right threat that gets you. Sometimes that feels a bit random, and the lead is locked in. You can't choose a lead like you can Gen 5 onwards, so the lead meta is all about making Stealth Rocks for the most part, and sometimes that feels a bit stupid, like it's just a scramble to make rocks or taunt the enemy or just do whatever. Pursuit Tar also makes it feel a little bit difficult to spin block, because ghost types are so threatened by the Pursuit Tar that can always be in the back. It can fit on any team. It's not necessarily archetype specific or anything, so there's always the risk that a Pursuit Tar could just come in and delete you. That makes it feel not that worth to block Rapid Spin. So it's got all those problems. What do I like about it though? I think of all the faster paced OU formats, this one is the most fun to me. I'm not even fully sure how to put my finger on why. Perhaps it's because you're at the edge of your seat at every turn. There's good defensive Pokemon here, but nothing that can really come in and heal infinitely and sidestep everything. Clefable's the closest thing, but that has poor stats. It can very easily be broken through. No team preview means you can surprise the enemy, which I think is satisfying. There's a good variety in what you can use here. A lot of stuff is viable. And even though offensive teams are good, it's not as if they're absolutely dominating everything. Balanced teams are good too. They're probably the most consistent way to play, in fact. I have had my frustrations with this format when I was actively playing it in tournaments back in the day, and there is a lot of variance here, not only matchup variance, but also just stuff like Dynamic Punch Machamp absolutely robbing games. In an objective sense, perhaps there's a lot more wrong with this metagame than there is with something like Gen 6 OU, but personally, I just like it more. I think it has a fun pace, it's fun to return to, and I think it's actually not a bad beginner metagame. You can probably pick up a sample team and it's pretty straightforward in how it works. Not to say it can't be complex, because it absolutely can, but game plans are pretty straightforward. I think team building is not as rigid as it is in other gens as well. You do need some things like a response to Ironhead Jirachi, but it feels like there's less boxes you need to tick, and teams can be a bit more varied in how they actually look. I talk about Gen 3 a lot, and sometimes Gen 3 can be hard for beginners because it's a centralized metagame where you do need to understand how things work a lot more. Gen 4, I think you can pick up and play a bit easier, and that makes it fun as a format to just queue up every now and then. as a change of pace, and that's what it is for me, and I quite enjoy it for that. And of course, at the top, this should come as no surprise, it's Gen 3. Gen 3 OU is my favorite format of all time. But listen, some of you folks who are fans of mine can be a bit annoying about Gen 3 OU to other gamers and disparage other generations. This is a franchise with many things to offer, with many different avenues to enjoy it. There's no need to disparage other generations and claim supremacy for the one you like, honestly. And this kind of thing just gives the Gen 3 community a bad name. So I would ask you all to relax a bit on that front. But yes, I love Gen 3 OU. I think that this generation strikes the perfect balance of everything that I want. It has satisfying moment-to-moment gameplay, cool top-tier Pokemon that are all varied in how they can be used, all interesting and fun to play with and against. The format has a reasonable power level. There's no high power moves, no Z moves, nothing crazy. It's not really possible to win in a single turn of setup with a Dragon Dance sweeper or anything. You have to earn it. You have to earn your sweeps with a gameplay that I find really enjoyable. Chipping things into certain health ranges, wearing down their defensive pieces so that they can no longer withstand your win condition. That's just the kind of gameplay I really enjoy. I think Gen 3 has the most of that kind of game. There's a variety of playstyles possible in this generation with different unique offensive builds that you can utilize. Some centered around spikes as the main form of progress, some trapping, some other concepts like explosion or luring things in. Team building I find very satisfying once you figure it out. It was a little bit tough at first when I first got into it because it feels like you're really punished for using anything outside the box. But that's because you got to learn how to use those things and where they actually feel good and useful. And that's when you can start really playing around with interesting teams, is once you actually form a solid understanding of the metagame. But people over-exaggerate how important it is to have niche Pokemon that can be viable. I don't think that's like the most important thing in the world. I think what's more important is that the meta teams are cool and fun. Even if I'm just running a normal spikes balance against a mirror match, there's going to be enough little differences that it's not like a complete mirror match like it feels in, Gen 1 or some other over-centralized gens. The way we're both trying to get through each other is like a satisfying back and forth. It usually feels like there's key moments where you can make a big play or go for a big swing, and we always love that. It's not like, when Z moves are present and it all comes down to one really, really high impact 50-50. Sometimes making a risky move gets you a little bit of progress. Sometimes it gets you a whole KO if you go really bold, but the game states in Gen 3 create opportunities for fun plays all the time. Even if you don't like playing the game, watching it, I think, is incredibly fun. There's always new and exciting ideas propping up. There's always interesting gameplay happening. The amount of variety within the top players and just how they approach the game, the subjectivity of what's even good, the disagreement about what's the number one Pokemon. There's so many ways to view this format, and it's like a canvas to paint on, where you can make your own style. And these things are true of every gen to an extent, but I think Gen 3 amplifies them the most. Supposed shortcomings of this generation, like perma-sand being present, no physical special split, and no item variety, I don't think they're problems at all. In fact, I think those things are overrated in terms of making a good metagame. I don't care if everything's symmetrical, like a Fire Punch has to be physical. A meta can form around anything, whether it makes logical in-game lore sense or not. And the metagame that happened to form around the best mechanics of Gen 3 was a good one. Yes, permanent sand is up in most games, but that ends up having a positive impact because it punishes Pokemon like Blissey, Suicune, and Snorlax who would otherwise, operate similar to how they do in Gen 2, where it's just really hard to actually nail them down and make progress. So I think sand has a positive impact on the game. I don't think using different items matters that much when there's plenty of variety in how every single Pokemon Gen 3 can be used, and plenty of little things to mix and match. EVs feel amplified without items. There's no type berries to live hits. There's no, life orb to get more damage ranges. It's all EVs. So EVs get really interesting and intricate in Gen 3. It feels like they've hit the perfect point in Gen 3 where there's, yes, limited options in what you can do, but also the perfect amount of things you can play around with and tweak and alter to your own play style. A combination of a healthy center, but some fun niche stuff that comes up now and then. And usually, if a niche Pokemon rises up, it's because they're genuinely doing something unique, and that feels valuable here. If a Pokemon can do something, just like a couple things that nothing else can do, there's probably a way to use them in an interesting way, or a situation where they will fill a gap your team needs. I think that's more interesting than a Pokemon propping up because it's just like a similar version of something that already exists. A Pokemon like Swampert does the job very well, and I don't think that a Pokemon similar to Swampert that's about the same power level really needs to exist, because you could just use Swampert. But alternatives to Swampert stand out. Flygon has different traits, different typing with Levitate, feels very different to use. And like Quagsire is an alternate Swampert, worse stats overall, but has Water Absorb. That can be a good trade-off on some teams. Little differences like that do stand out more in a format like this. There are some things that are valid to dislike, like Rock Slide Flinch coming up quite a bit and deciding a lot of games. That can be pretty annoying. There's a lot you can do to mitigate the risk of that, and many players do, but sometimes it just happens, and you can't do much about it. Metagross attack raise from Medium Mash can be really dumb. You go to a check that's supposed to resist Metagross, and now they're just beating you instead because they have so much attack. That doesn't feel very fair. You know, Jirachi's Ice Punch freeze chance is 20%, and that can just ruin a game for you. I don't know though, every single gen has little variants like this. I think Gen 3 has the least annoying examples of that overall. And you have a lot of control, it feels like, over stuff like that. So I think Gen 3 strikes a great balance of being fun enough for newcomers, but rewarding for people who really sink their teeth into it. In my opinion, it's the best format OU has ever seen. Or at least it appeals to me the most, because there's many ways to enjoy this game. I enjoy all the things I just said about Gen 3 the most, and Gen 3 has all of those. So that's my favorite. But some players enjoy other things. What do you enjoy? What is your favorite OU format in the game's history? I would love to know. Let me know down below in the comments. And thank you very much for watching. And thank you again to Marvel Strike Force for sponsoring this video. Use the link down below or scan the QR code to download Marvel Strike Force today.